Intellectualism, racism, slavery, religion, and hypocrisy are the main themes Mark Twain used to point out some very dark things that were going on in the USA before and after the Civil War. Indeed, Huckleberry Finn is all about racism, religion, and society morals through irony and satire. Today we're going to focus on the main themes in Huckleberry Finn, and we are also going to pay attention to how Mark Twain used irony and satire to tackle such sensitive topics in a post-Civil War America that was conservative and deeply racist. Hi everyone, bonjour, bon dia, hola, and guten tag. Welcome to TBM. This is Targeting Books and Movies, a place where we discuss literature in a simple way. And today, the targeted book is going to be Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. But before starting the summary and analysis, let's first get a glimpse of the author's biography, and then we're going to dig right into the story. Who was Mark Twain? Samuel Langhorne Clemens, known as Mark Twain, was an American novelist, humorist, and journalist. He was born in 1835 in the United States, in Missouri, and died in 1910. He lived with his parents and siblings. His father died when he was 11 years old in 1847. What about his profession? He decided to leave school and worked as a printer's apprentice for a local newspaper, which allowed him to be aware of what was going on in the world. In his young adult life, Twain had successfully written amusing articles while working in different newspaper companies. In 1859, he entered a new career and worked as a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi River. But he went back to writing, starting at Nevada newspaper, and that's when he decided to use the pen name Mark Twain. In this video, we're going to refer to him as Mark Twain or Twain, since this is how people recognize him the most. So, Twain eventually got married to Olivia Langdon in 1870, with whom he had children. After a few years in his writing career, Mark Twain focused on social criticism, and that's when his novel The Gilded Age came out. He co-wrote this book with publisher Warner, and they decided to criticize political corruption, big businesses, and the American obsession with the idea of getting rich. However, Twain's first literary success was in 1865 with the celebrated Jumping Frog. Twain became internationally famous for his travel narratives and his adventure stories, such as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which we're going to talk about today on TBM. Now, Huckleberry Finn was a poor 13-year-old boy adopted by the widow Douglas, who lived with her sister, Miss Watson. They were both very religious and tried to give Huck a respectable lifestyle by bringing him to church and encouraging him to go to school. However, Huck didn't feel comfortable with those rules and found them very difficult to follow. He hated wearing shoes and neat clothes, and he liked to play and sit on the ground without worrying about his clothes getting dirty. He also didn't see the point of Bible studies, as Bible characters were all dead, and neither did he like to go to school. Huckleberry Finn was a young boy who spoke with a lot of vernacular, and Twain even wrote the novel in a way that appears as if a child had written it with spelling mistakes. How about Huck's father? Well, he was a violent man and a drunkard who couldn't properly take care of him. On the contrary, Tom Sawyer was a middle-class boy who lived with his parents. He loved books and stories and had a very interesting imagination for his age. He would go for dangerous and imprudent adventures, perhaps trying to mimic book adventures he read, which was not such a good idea. Huckleberry Finn ended up being kidnapped by his father, who wanted the money he got from the robber's treasure. Huck was taken to live confined and beaten in a cabin near the river from St. Petersburg. Huck got the idea of faking his own death and escaped his father. His plan consisted of shooting a pig and pouring his blood inside the cabin and on his clothes, which worked perfectly since everybody believed Huck died. The whole town helped search for his body, but nobody could find him. He was hiding on an island located in the Mississippi River, where he ended up meeting Jim, an African-American man who was one of Miss Watson's slaves and who had also decided to run away because he didn't want to be separated from his family. In fact, Miss Watson was planning to send him to live and work on a plantation with horrible landlords and far from his family. Here's what's interesting about that situation. They were both living in a world where everything opposed them, from civil rights perception to the definition of freedom of an individual. Yet, they were both on the same boat here. Two individuals running away for their freedom. They had nothing in common, yet there they were becoming a team, which meant going against the law. Huckleberry Finn heard that people in town were suspecting Jim of his murder. He turned back to him and told him that they had to leave the island because people were after them, when in reality, they were only after Jim. This shows that Huck considered Jim as a companion and that he did not intend to leave him by himself. It's very important to understand here that if Huck didn't stay with Jim, it would have been very difficult or even impossible for Jim to stay free for a long time. Huck could at least pretend that he was Jim's owner, and people wouldn't suspect them as much as if Jim was going around alone. Back into the story. Together, they built a raft, escaped on it, heading to the Midwest to Cairo in Illinois, trying to reach a free state through the Ohio River, and that's when their adventures began. After a big storm, Huck and Jim left the cave in which they were hiding as water rose up onto the island. Then they entered a house that had been carried away by the flood. There they found clothes and money. Jim ended up seeing a dead man in this house, but didn't tell Huck about it. Later on in the story, we learn that the corpse was Huck's father's, and we understand that Jim was protecting Huck from sorrow by keeping this information to himself, which shows that Jim is an intelligent human being who cares about Huck. After that, Huck goes to town wearing ghost clothes to see if he could get some news concerning Jim's escape. He heard that a group of men were heading to the island to check if they could catch Jim there. Huck returned back to Jim and both left on the raft. Next, they sneaked into an old steamboat and saw 3 robbers and killers. Huck and Jim got separated when trying to flee from those individuals who ended up seeing them. After a while, Huck found Jim back but tried to trick him by telling him that they never got separated and that Jim had either imagined it or dreamed it. Jim got disappointed in Huck because of that lie, and Huck realizes that Jim actually has feelings and apologizes to him. That part is so important because Huck realizes that he cares about Jim, and he had not necessarily thought about it before. Later on, they get separated again after a steamboat ran over the raft. Huck found refuge in the house of the Grangerfords and ended up being adopted again. However, he stayed with them for a very short period of time because this family happened to be in a feud with another family for many years. In the midst of a gun battle between these two families, in which the Grangerford family members died, Huck ran away. Jim, on the other hand, was hiding in the woods and was being fed by the Grangerford's slaves. The two fugitives found their way back together and kept going down the river. Huck and Jim met 2 conmen on their way who presented themselves as the Duke and the King of another land. These individuals pretended to be someone they were not and conned people for a living. They sometimes organized false theater plays and other times tried to steal money from a family by pretending to be a member of that family arriving from abroad. The father of this family had just died and they were in the middle of his funeral. Huck tells the truth and exposes the false Duke and the false King, saying that they were con men. The Duke and the King's last trick was to spread the rumor that Jim was a runaway slave. Their goal was to obtain money by selling Jim to a farmer who ended up being Tom Sawyer's family. Huck pretended to be Tom Sawyer and was welcomed inside a house. When Tom Sawyer arrived, he pretended to be Sid, his younger brother. Both Huck and Tom Sawyer intended to free Jim, who was kept prisoner. Nevertheless, Tom had another plan that implied dangerous and unnecessary methods simply to make it more fun and look like adventures he read, not caring about Jim at all. It's important to mention that Jim had been freed by Miss Watson on her deathbed, and Tom knew all about it but didn't say a word for the purpose of excitement and adventure. When they tried to leave with Jim, Tom got shot on the leg by the farmer, and that's when he told the truth. Jim took on the occasion to tell Huck that his father had died and that he saw his corpse in the floating house. At the end, Huck refused Tom's aunt's offer of adoption and decided to travel to the West and to pursue his freedom. Jim, on the other hand, will continue to have a risky life because at that time, a freed slave could easily be killed or sold back into slavery without his consent. That's the end of today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. Subscribe to discover the targeted book for next week, and feel free to like and comment down below. Send a request regarding the book you want me to analyze and summarize to targetingbooks@gmail.com.